And when all those, YouTubers and TikTokers get invited to the White House to sit down with President Trump and to talk to President Trump and get the Epstein binders. And I think the evidence suggests that they are not exactly that forwards thinking yet, though there's a lot of people that are at that level. And Palantir is one good example of a company that is very forwards thinking, very effective, very in there, and real sketchy, among many others. But
it's a wonderful company.
Yeah, doing great things for the world.
Great work.
But I would argue that there is, we would be living in a very different world if like the cabal controlling the world, like the deep staters at the top of that program, had been thinking that way from before COVID. I think they would not have wound up with like Joe Rogan literally dismantling them single-handedly.
Or what if that's part of it?
What if Joe's
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No, but I'm just getting tinfoil for the fuck of it.
What if him being a guy that would respond that way is plausible. Tested, and it's like, of course he's going to respond that way because he's going to look at things that don't make any sense, and he's got a big platform and call it out. We could use that. He has no idea. I think about, dude, in our little studio right here, I think about that all the time. Like, what are we a useful idiot for?
Smart man.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you're right that what we see today, I'm saying it looks like they didn't win in the short-term context, as in they didn't get, FEMA camps. They didn't get ongoing forever vaccines entirely. They didn't get forever control. They didn't get the forever pandemic, whatever it is. But that wasn't necessarily their goal. If they were really smart, they might be thinking more long term, and maybe some of them are. Maybe some of the really devious ones at the top, some of the super billionaires, whatever. Maybe they are thinking like we need to dissolve the truth a little more. We need to dissolve, the boundaries between reality and truth. We need to divide the people more. And so they're like, during this COVID era, we're going to get our payday. We're going to get this fucking control. We're going to get some more laws passed. We're going to set a precedent, but we're also going to divide. We're going to conquer. We're going to destroy.
Yep.
And all that did happen. And we are sitting in that world today where my truth is not your truth, is definitely not my parents' truth that are watching Rachel Maddow. And
oh, your parents still watch Rachel?
Yeah, they do. And they love her. And I've been working on them. But yeah, that opinion programming is strong. And there's a piece baked into the cake that is so important that is like a immune response to other information. And it's this misinformation fear of like, no, like you're getting sucked into misinformation. Like anything you're sharing with me is misinformation. Like I don't even need to read your sources because you're wrong. Like, because Rachel says that's crazy talk, right? Don't matter that she reported on Russiagate for, 3 years and never retracted it, proven to be false. Like, don't matter any of these things that they'll get wrong on these mainstream networks or even on the alternative networks. There's a immune response built into this sort of like hive mind thinking that's getting fostered in all of these sort of like sheepy kinds of ways of thinking that is super sketchy, because there's not a good way, short of like shaking them out of it somehow, which also like, how do you open people's minds up to realizing that
it's hard,
it's complicated.
It's really hard because we all have a tendency towards some form of confirmation bias, some stronger than others. But like you look at something objectively, you just pointed out, great. You see the mainstream media get broken in certain ways with certain subject matters that they just dug in on and yelled at everyone who said the opposite, or even just said, hey, can we look at this? To the point that now, again, it's another boy who cried wolf.
Bingo.
Because what happens when, and I don't have an example of this right now, but what happens when Rachel says something on TV that's like, oh, it's actually backed by evidence?
Exactly.
You and I and anyone out there who's like not a hardcore like pink hair lefty is going to be like, at first thought, all right, should I even listen to that because it's Rachel Maddow? Which is why I always try to do that. I try, like, I don't care who it is. Like, when I see a clip from even, like, Don Lemon coming on, like, I watch
See what he says.
Yeah. I'm like, all right, what does he got here? Once in a while, I'm like, oh, that was interesting.
You'll learn something either way.
Yeah, blind squirrels, right, whatever.
Yeah.
But finds a nut once in a while. But, we got to be careful that, and I think about this as someone who's, like, in the independent media, whatever the fuck that means at this point. We got to be careful that the same sins that mainstream media was sucked down into, we do not become on the other side. And in my opinion, a lot of that can happen without, again, we were talking about intentions and incentives. A lot of that can happen without intention or bad intention or anything like that. There's just little traps that are out there that it really comes back to like audience capture. You and I were talking about this off camera. I think about that all the time. Like when I feel something getting pulled one way, I run the opposite way.
Yep, exactly.
Right? And it's just to reset things. It makes me a lot poorer than I should be.
Yep.
But in the long term,
important.
That's how you stay in my type of business, like being a journalist or being what it is. And I think especially guys like you who are looking at the most insane shit, that's the biggest battle you fight, because you don't want to suddenly be like, all right, I found X, Y, and Z that's all wrong about topic T. And then just assume, therefore, everything I'm going to find after about this also needs to be wrong about that. If you find something that's right, it's like, well, all right, this was right, and figure out where the fucking truth is, wherever that falls.
I mean, the most obvious example of that conference, I think there's a subclass, like above a certain age, like maybe above Gen X-ish, millennials-ish. Those older folks, they are way more prone to this, immune response, this gripping up against, because they don't understand, they didn't grow up as much in this social media environment. They don't understand that is how to source information from the internet. Younger people don't so much have that same version of that problem, but it still is there. And the most obvious example of it is Israel and Palestine, right? I think in the sense that people, and you can see it so clearly on the internet, that the vast majority of people wind up in their camp, and then everything from the other side is propaganda, and everything from your side is real, right? Yes. But before we get too into that, you're talking about in your side of audience capture, and in my side, a version of that, like, because you're a podcaster, people come to you, you talk. I'm like a researcher, and I go out looking at sources and trying to figure out what's going on and learning and then sharing. And the obvious version of what one of those like trappings in my side of that is what I would call like access journalism. Access is a hell of a drug. And when all those, YouTubers and TikTokers get invited to the White House to sit down with President Trump and to talk to President Trump and get the Epstein binders, that access feels real good, right? And suddenly you don't want to lose that access. That's like you're in the White House, right? And so you don't want to say anything bad about President Trump. You don't really want to like report on how RFK did that thing. You don't want to and that access has always been one of the first like low-level layers of blackmail. And it's not blackmail, but it is coercion. And journalists fall into that shit all the time. And it's very dangerous. And now, like, we used to have journalists that were trained journalists.
Yes.
And they were, then working in a system that was largely bought out over time and, corrupted from above. But a lot of those journalists were badass journalists, right? Like, rest in peace, Gary Webb. Yep. Now we live in a world where all the journalists aren't even fucking trained. It's just a bunch of random people, for the most part, that just like blew up because they shot a basketball from like the half court line or something.
Or the people that are trained who are living in mainstream media are breaking the rules of what they were trained on.
Exactly. Well, what are they even trained on anymore with the state of universities today?
And you're absolutely right about that. Let's even assume it's somewhat right. There's still like, I was telling you off camera, like I'm passionate about finding the people who are still in that world who do the job the right way, because we got to uplift those voices, the real moderate, like, let me just fucking get at what's figuring out here or what's going on here, because maybe you could save some of that. Like, I don't want to kill off everything, but at the same time, when I hear people be like, down with the mainstream media, I get it, bro. Like, I'm with you in a lot of ways. Like, how can you not be?
But it's an important narrative to refine. Yes. Right? Because I mean, it seems obvious to me, but it might be worth saying that like people like you and me, especially people like me, like all the communicators of journalism on the internet, the people that most people are actually getting their news from, most of them are not journalists. Like, I am not out there sourcing stories and like getting leads and like reporting the facts of the news that are new. I'm out there sourcing from the journalists that went out and got the stories. And I'm collating that and telling stories about it to communicate it in a way that'll get to bigger audiences, and then sharing that audience into the journalists that got it for me.
You're an amalgamator.
I'm an amalgamator, right? But without that journalist layer, all the stories dry up, right? There's no more information coming. And I think actually, to our point here, let's just say the deep state, all these folks that would benefit from the truth being debased, they're not incentivized to want more journalism like that. They want facts to kind of become fluid. They want everything to be opinion programming and everything to be opinion fighting and everything to be culture wars and everything to be your side, my side. Having a strong journalistic base of integrity in the center of our country that's reporting the facts of the news without bias and opinion, that is critical to maintaining free speech and free and true information. And without it, people like me suddenly, like, how do I even begin to source information if I can't And like right now, what I tend to do is I tend to intentionally source mainstream sources because we know that's at least the accepted narrative. Even like that's like the paid narrative, so to speak. And sometimes I'm sure it's good, true journalism. And sometimes I'm sure it's a little skewed by higher interests, right?
For sure.
But regardless, this is the same reason why I source Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is highly censored and highly controlled. And so if it's in there, and you can check the sources, or if it's in mainstream journalism, then you at least can say like, well, this is endorsed by the machine, by the establishment. And so if the establishment is willing to say this kind of stuff, then like for the exact same reason that when I report on Israel-Palestine, for example, I tend to try to find sources that are coming from inside of Israeli publications as much as I can, just so that you're like going directly to like, if Israel is reporting that Benjamin Netanyahu was funding Hamas and they're having a problem with it, I feel a lot better about that than if like Al Jazeera is reporting that Benjamin Netanyahu was, funding Hamas. Fortunately, they've both reported on it. But that's another story.
When did you, let's take one step back before we go full blown into Israel Palestine, because there's one thing we've been leaving out there, and people are probably want you to talk about it. The whole Epstein thing. Like, had you looked at that back when it happened at all, or was this you really came into it in 2023?
No, I hadn't looked into it in any depth. I've obviously heard about it, but I hadn't really looked into anything in any depth. Like I am new and young at this, and I don't hide that at all. And no, the first time that I dug into it was during that first couple months, just on the side, learning, researching, reading. And then, there was a development in the Ghislaine case. I think it was her like trials is what was happening. And we were getting more documents and stuff like that. And that was when I first started digging into the documents because there was new documents dropping. And it was kind of weird, honestly. I was new to X at the time. This would have been like late 2023. I think it would have like the turn of the new year to 2024.
Well, her trial
It wasn't her original trial. It was like some new maybe it was Virginia Giuffre. There was new testimony that was released. I forget exactly what happened. Okay. But it was like the turn into 2024, and there was a bunch of new Epstein documents and new court documents and stuff, and everyone was kind of collating through them, and X was having these big spaces where all the experts would come in and talk about it. And like I had blown up on the Diddy stuff about looking at the Diddy transcripts or rather the Diddy like court document stuff around Lil Rod's lawsuit. And so I kind of got defaulted into being this new kind of small big account on X, and I started getting invited into these like Epstein spaces as though I was an expert. And like I had learned a lot more than the average person, but I was like out of depth next to everyone else that was in those spaces. And I was just learning a lot. And I wasn't like trying to pretend I was an expert, but I was, involved in learning. And it was just weird to be like suddenly thrust in the spotlight. And that really incentivized me and motivated me to really like catch up and learn what I'm talking about more. So I got pretty serious about it at that point.
Okay. What did you first think when you came upon that? Were you looking at it like...
Upon Epstein?
Yeah. Like right away, were you going, okay, this was definitely an intel op?
No. At first, I didn't really have the context to know what to think. I think that I sort of suspected it was an intel op, especially once I came across the Acosta quote, the famous Acosta quote about like leave him alone. He belongs to intelligence. Duh. Don't know how else you interpret that. But it wasn't until reading One Nation Under Blackmail. And the first time I read One Nation Under Blackmail, I listened to it on Audible.
That's a heavy listen.
And holy shit, I didn't retain a single word of it, just in one ear and out the other. And it was by like chapter 2 that I realized that that's what was happening, because Whitney is such a dense writer and such a dense thinker that she's like in one paragraph, I could make a 10-minute TikTok video about every single paragraph in that book, just showing you who that guy is and who that guy is and what that company should, because she'll just reference thing after thing after thing after thing after thing. And how they're all connected. Yeah. And I do think that it's a delicate line, because you can get too connection happy without fortunately I know that she does do a lot of deep research to there are connections in most of those cases that are there's depth. And when you dig into them, you can find it. But I realized as I was listening, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to finish this listen through, and it'll be like subliminal programming, so that when I buy the book and read it, I'll have heard Goldberg before, and I'll have heard Promise Software before, and I'll have more locates. I don't know if that actually happened or not, but then I bought the books and read through it a second time. Then I read through it a third time and took notes because I realized that I needed to. It's just so dense. And so now I've read the first one 3.5 times, and the second one 3 times, and got notes all throughout it. And I still have a million things to learn from it. And I still, when I went on Joe Rogan and credited Whitney for all that work, she still came out and corrected me because I got a lot of things. I misrepresented a lot of things the way that she would interpret them. Right. I interpreted them slightly differently. Yeah. And I love some of her corrections too, because they helped redirect me on a few of her points that were more subtle than I had realized.
What were some of them?
The two big ones were, the first one I don't think is, it's important. It's that Epstein, the evidence is not necessarily that he worked for Mossad specifically. It's that he was aligned with Israeli intelligence factions like Mossad is just one of many, right? And the evidence does not exactly align with him being on for Mossad, which is sort of a technicality, but those kinds of technicalities do matter in this context.
They matter. That's interesting. So.
Yeah. Some people called it a little nitpicky. I don't mind at all. I don't mind criticism one bit, especially when it's coming from someone who's way more educated than me that's helping me learn. The big one that was really useful is that she highlighted how I do a lot of looking at the first part of the thing and like Epstein backwards. And a lot of her book that is really important, and in some ways the most important to look forwards at, is that her book is a sort of a two-part thesis. And one, This is where blackmail comes from. This is the history. This is how Epstein came up, and this is the history. And then two is Epstein transitioned in his lifetime, and all blackmailers have and did, from the pre-digital to the digital. And as we came into the digital age, they were all updating into, we don't necessarily just need these human operations anymore. We need digital AI technocratic solutions now. And all these new AI and tech companies, he was targeting them. He was purposely becoming friends with them or blackmailing them. They were building softwares. And now a lot of these I talked about the Paragon scandal in Italy that was just happening with you off camera.
Yeah, that was
we can come back to that another time. And then, for example, Palantir is a great example of one of these companies that's very, terrifying. Unit 8200 is that's the Israeli NSA, basically, Unit 8200 for the audience. Mm-hmm. And they are famous. They're well, I don't know if famous, but it is their open policy that they have stated before on record that they started exporting their in-house technology operations to the private sector, meaning if the NSA is doing all this tech, like hacking and, tech work for the intelligence community, it's like, let's turn that whole section into a private company and send it off into the world. So it's no longer affiliated with us. And it'll develop these solutions that'll, change the world and make it more secure or make it more this or that. But are you really not still working with them?
It's a Trojan horse.
Right? And in a way, it's that same plausible deniability, because once it's in the private sector, then it's not us. We didn't do it. They did it. That's their problem. And that was how intelligence agencies were originally founded.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.